Thank you, everyone. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So hello, everyone, and thank you also from my side for having me. I'm Franziska Schreiber, and as Astrid already pointed out, I'm working with her at the Department of International Urbanism at the University in Stuttgart. And what I would like to do in the next couple of minutes is to draw your attention to the role of digital neighborhood platforms during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also potentially in the future. And if I would have to put it with Carlos' words, and Astrid just mentioned it, this is probably a technology for community engagement about place. So this is how he had categorized it. And why I want to focus on this issue is because I noticed that much of the neighborhood support and solidarity actions we have witnessed in response to COVID-19 in the analog realm was actually initiated virtually on exactly such platforms. But interestingly, we know so little about how they operate, how they're being used, especially in times of crisis, whether they can increase and contribute to community resilience, and also how they affect and shape social cohesion at the local and the city level. So what I want to do is I want to share some of my observations from the German context with you, and also reflect a little bit on earlier research I have conducted on this issue. So your question might now be, okay, so what are digital neighborhood platforms? If we would have to define them, I would say there are hyperlocal social networks that seek to connect people actually in their immediate environment, so in a geographically defined area, both online and offline, and ease the exchange of local information and services. They're actually rather, I would say, a new phenomenon. They emerged about 10 years ago, but they're already quite successful, and not just because of COVID-19, but because they respond, I would say, to a growing demand of people to overcome the widely felt anonymity in cities, especially in larger ones. And in fact, over the past couple of years, we have seen an emergence of such platforms around the world. Here on the right side, I've included a couple of logos from these different platforms that exist. The most prominent one is probably Nextdoor, operating in the US, but not now also available in Europe. Then we have Neighborly, which is a platform in New Zealand, or Nebenan.de, a platform in Germany. And where such platforms are available, it became quite obvious that they then very often turn into very important sites for social interaction, for public debates, and for civic engagements, and for more and more people fulfill actually functions that are traditionally associated with analog public spaces. And I think this is quite important to bear in mind, especially if we talk about this issue in the context of COVID-19, where analog public spaces were to be avoided or even restricted to use. So those virtual spaces actually also allow communities to share local information, to ask for advice, or to offer help and connect with others. And so it was quite obvious that doing, and especially at the beginning of the COVID-19, such platforms took on quite a prominent role. And I would like to illustrate this by focusing on the German context, on Germany's largest neighborhood platform, which is called Nebenan.de. It was founded in 2015, and it already has more than 1.6 million users. And what's important to say is that it operates as a social business. So it generates its revenues from voluntary contributions and cooperation with local businesses and city authorities who pay fee for their business and organizational profiles. But if you register as an individual person, then it's free of charge. And it was quite fascinating actually to see that as soon as the corona pandemic actually took off, user numbers and activities on this platform increased really significantly. So to give you just some numbers, between mid-March and the end of April, daily registrations quadrupled, nationwide membership increased from 1.4 to 1.6 million users, and weekly activities increased by 30%. But it was not just the quantitative numbers that changed, but also the content of the activities themselves, because all of a sudden people started using the platform to offer and organize corona-related help. So assistance was provided for grocery shopping on these platforms, childcare was offered, or support for learning activities. And the platform itself also expanded its activities and came up with its own corona, or the dedicated kind of corona help page and hotline, and also started cooperating with a number of city authorities in Germany, allowing them to pass on corona-related information directly to citizens that are using the platform. So that means that if you're on the platform, if you use such platforms, then you can benefit from additional information, you can benefit from crucial support structures, and also relevant knowledge that is being shared on such platforms, which increases the capacity to adapt to the effects of the pandemic. But then, of course, it's always the question of who uses such platforms and who benefits. And unfortunately, there's no empirical research published yet on the use and implications of these platforms during Corona. But earlier research I have conducted on this issue kind of came to rather ambivalent conclusions, I would say, because on the one hand, yes, such platforms really can expand the local social network of people. They meet new friends, they establish loose contacts to others. People we interviewed also expressed an increased feeling of belonging and trust in the neighborhood. But then again, not all social groups use such platforms equally, and especially people with a lower socioeconomic background are greatly underrepresented, and also people with migration background feel very often hardly addressed by monolingual digital networks. So this in turn means that certain groups fall out or fall through the neighborhood support system, and not just analog, but also digitally, which in turn means that they may end up being potentially doubly disadvantaged. So while such platforms can potentially increase social cohesion and also contribute to community resilience, they also definitely bear the risk of reinforcing social inequalities if not well designed. So what does it mean for post-corona times? What can we learn from this? I think what became obvious is that they play an important role in order to really quickly and flexibly organize community support in times of crisis. They provide a really useful crisis management tool, but they also have their limitations we should learn from, especially considering that an increasing part of public and social life will take place virtually in the future. And so I think it would make a lot of sense to conceptualize and recognize those platforms as digital public spaces, which need to be planned and designed and managed just as carefully as their physical counterparts in order to be socially inclusive. And this necessitates a much better understanding of how such platforms work, how they're being used, why certain groups use them and others don't, and how we can make them more accessible to counteract social inequalities and to address the digital divide. And one point I would like to raise, especially also with regards to the discussion later, is that I think it's quite important to know that the most frequently used platforms, such as Nebenan.de in Germany or Nextdoor in the US, are actually operated commercially, which to me raises really the fundamental questions of data protection, sustainable financing, how to provide and maintain such useful digital infrastructure also in the long run, and what the potential role of the public sector could also be in this regard. This is just so far from my side, but I'm looking forward to our discussion later. And
yes.